Imagine a city with more than 5,000 people living side by side. It has its own bakeries, supermarkets, and even fast food joints. But here's the twist. This city doesn't sit on land. It floats, it moves, and it never, ever sleeps. Every single day, this community devours nearly 18,000 meals, burns through mountains of supplies, and somehow manages to keep running in the middle of an endless ocean. So, how do you feed a small town that drifts across the waves? What keeps the ovens hot, the freezers cold, and the coffee flowing when the nearest grocery store is thousands of miles away? And most importantly, what happens if the food chain breaks? This isn't just a story about warships and jets. It's about the hidden heartbeat of a floating fortress and the sailors who keep it alive one plate at a time. Feeding a warship isn't like running a cafeteria. It's like fueling an entire small town 3 times a day. On a U.S. Navy carrier, more than 5,000 sailors rely on hot meals, and that adds up fast. We're talking about nearly 18,000 plates served every single day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the midnight rations that keep the night crew going. Now imagine what that actually looks like. 2,000 eggs cracked before most people even roll out of bed. Pancakes stacked taller than a man. Gallons upon gallons of coffee disappearing in minutes. And that's just breakfast. By lunchtime, the galleys are dishing out mountains of burgers, pasta, steaks, vegetables, and soups, repeated nonstop until every sailor has eaten. The truth is, food on a carrier isn't just comfort, it's survival. Each calorie is fuel for sailors hauling weapons across the flight deck, engineers sweating over massive engines, or pilots preparing for a launch in freezing winds. Miss a meal, and the entire machine begins to slow down. That's why the Navy calls the galleys the heart of the carrier. And the flight deck may roar with jet engines, but it's the kitchens deep below that keep the blood flowing. Without them, this city at sea would grind to a halt in days. But here's the catch. Feeding thousands of sailors isn't just about cooking. It's about running a non-stop system that never sleeps. And what happens inside those steel kitchens is almost impossible to picture. Step inside the galley of an aircraft carrier, and you'll see the real engine room of the ship. The roar of jets fades, replaced by the clatter of trays, the hiss of steam, and the non-stop rhythm of knives chopping against steel counters. Here, culinary specialists, the Navy's professional chefs, work in shifts that feel endless. 12 hours on, 12 hours off, then repeat. By the time most sailors line up for breakfast, the galley crew has already been awake for hours. They're flipping eggs by the hundreds, sliding trays of bacon out of giant ovens, and stacking fresh loaves of bread as fast as they cool. When dinner finally ends, the night crew is already setting up for midrats, the midnight meal that keeps sailors running through the graveyard shift. The scale is mind-bending. A single breakfast can burn through 2,000 eggs in under an hour. Add in hundreds of gallons of coffee, towers of pancakes, and enough fruit to fill a truck. And that's just one meal. By lunch, steaks, pasta, and vegetables are rolling out non-stop, feeding wave after wave of hungry sailors. But the galleys aren't just about food, they're about morale. In the mess decks, sailors crowd shoulder to shoulder at long steel tables, grabbing quick bites before heading back to engines, weapons, or flight operations. For them, hot food isn't just fuel. It's a break from the grind, a taste of normal in a world of steel and ocean. For the crew working the galley, though, there is no pause. The moment one wave of sailors leaves, a no. There arrives. Dishes clatter, pans scrub, ovens reload. It's relentless. And yet, it's the glue that holds this floating city together, because without the galley, the roar of the flight deck above would go silent. Feeding thousands of sailors isn't just about what happens in the kitchen, it's about how the food gets there in the first place. Because once a carrier leaves port, it can sail for weeks or even months without ever touching land. So how do you restock a floating city in the middle of the ocean? The answer is a high-stakes operation called underway replenishment, or INREP. Picture this. 2 giant ships racing side by side, just 50 yards apart, while the sea heaves beneath them. Thick cables are fired across the gap, and soon pallets of supplies are flying through the air. Crates of fruit, frozen meat, soda, flour, even ice cream zip across the waves, dangling from steel lines like cargo on a zip line. On deck, forklifts roar as sailors sprint to grab the pallets, moving them into giant elevators that plunge deep into the ship. From there, the supplies vanish into the reefers, massive walk-in refrigerators stacked floor to ceiling with meat, vegetables, and dairy. Separate freezer compartments lock away frozen goods for long-term use, while dry storage rooms are crammed with flour, rice, cereal, and canned goods. Every item is logged, rotated, and checked daily, because one mistake, like spoiled meat or a failed freezer, can affect the meals of thousands. And then there's water. A carrier can't exactly haul in bottled water for 5,000 sailors. Instead, it makes its own. Deep inside the ship, desalination plants suck in seawater, strip away the salt, and pump out hundreds of thousands of gallons of fresh water every day. On some carriers, the number pushes close to 400,000 gallons daily, enough to drink, cook, clean, and even do laundry. Together, this system of non-stop replenishments, industrial-scale storage, and onboard water production creates a supply chain unlike anything else on Earth. It's a element of logistics performed on rolling seas, because if the chain breaks, the floating fortress slows to a crawl. But food and water aren't the only lifelines here. In fact, there's one thing sailors consume even faster than meals, and without it, the entire ship would come grinding to a halt. If food is the backbone of a carrier, then drinks are its bloodstream, and nothing flows faster than coffee. On a ship with 5,000 sailors, caffeine is the unofficial fuel. Giant steel urns line the mess decks, pouring cup after cup, 24 hours a day. Sailors joke that the real fuel of the Navy isn't jet fuel, it's coffee, and they're not wrong. But coffee is just the start. Every morning, hundreds of gallons of milk vanish in minutes, especially at breakfast. Sports drinks and juices keep variety on the menu, while sodas arrive by the pallet during resupply. And yes, even ice cream has its place in the reefers. It's a morale booster, rolled out for birthdays, holidays, or just to give the crew a taste of home when the days blur together. Then there's the ship's store. Tucked away in the lower decks, it's the closest thing to a floating corner market. Sailors line up to grab energy drinks, candy, chips, protein bars, and even toiletries. Some carriers have even experimented with branded coffee, Starbucks-style packets or beans, just to give the crew a small reminder of normal life. It might sound simple, but these little comforts mean everything. A steaming mug before standing watch on a freezing flight deck. An ice-cold soda after hours in the engine room. A sports drink shared with a friend during downtime. Drinks aren't just hydration, they're rituals. They're moments of sanity in the middle of endless steel and sea, and behind every coffee urn or milk carton is a sailor who makes sure it's there. Which brings us to the people running the entire system, the hidden professionals who make sure this floating city never runs dry. Behind every tray of food and every cup of coffee is a sailor with one job title: culinary specialist. But don't let the name fool you. These aren't just cooks. They're trained chefs, logisticians, safety inspectors, and morale builders all at once. Their journey starts at a Navy school in Virginia, where they learn everything from knife skills to industrial-scale cooking. But the training goes deeper. They study nutrition, food safety, and large-scale logistics. Because cooking for 5,000 people isn't just about flavor, it's about survival. One mistake in sanitation, one batch of food not checked properly, and hundreds could get sick in the middle of the ocean. That simply cannot happen. On board, standards are relentless. Counters are scrubbed down constantly. Food thermometers check every tray. Storage rooms are inspected daily. Sailors rotate stock, track expiration dates, and monitor freezers like their lives depend on it. Because in a way, they do. But safety is just one side of the job. Nutrition is the other. Every meal has to fuel sailors burning thousands of calories a day, whether they're hauling bombs across the flight deck, repairing engines in sweltering heat, or flying jets into the night sky. The menus are designed to balance protein, carbs, and fats. Steak and potatoes one night, chicken stir-fry the next, pasta loaded with vegetables when energy is needed most. And then there's the psychology of food. Too bland, and morale sinks. Too repetitive, and the complaints pile up. But a well-seasoned dish, a colorful plate, or even the smell of bread baking can lift spirits instantly. These small details keep the crew motivated through long, grinding months at sea. Culinary specialists know they're not just feeding bodies, they're keeping minds sharp and morale steady. In a city that never sleeps, their work is invisible, but without them, the mission would collapse. But the real proof of their impact shows up during the rare moments when meals become something more than just fuel, moments that transform the steel corridors into something that feels like home. Day after day, the routine on a carrier can blur together: steel walls, endless corridors, the constant roar of engines. But every so often, food turns that grind into something unforgettable. These are the moments when the galley doesn't just feed the crew, it lifts them. Take pizza night. The galley crew rolls out dough by the dozens, layers on cheese and pepperoni, and slices tray after tray until the last sailor is full. Simple? Sure. But on a ship thousands of miles from shore, a hot slice feels like a feast. For a few minutes, it's not about work or war, it's about comfort. Then there are the steel beach picnics. When the weather cooperates, grills are hauled out onto the open flight deck. Burgers, hot dogs, and chicken sizzle in the sea breeze while music blasts over the loudspeakers. Imagine standing on the deck of the world's most advanced warship, eating a burger while staring at the endless Pacific horizon. For a few hours, the ship feels less like a fortress and more like a backyard barbecue. Holidays bring the biggest transformations. On Thanksgiving, the galleys pull out all the stops: roast turkeys carved by hand, trays of stuffing, pies lined up in rows, even elaborate desserts sculpted into displays. Christmas brings steaks, cakes, and decorations that echo home traditions. Independence Day means red, white, and blue frosting piped into stars and stripes. For sailors far from family, those meals are reminders that tradition survives, even in the harshest seas. And it's not always the big events that matter. Sometimes it's the small touches: freshly baked cookies passed out after a late-night watch, warm loaves of bread cooling on racks, a scoop of ice cream during a movie night. Tiny details that spark joy, create memories, and bond the crew together. Because on a carrier, morale isn't built only on the flight deck or in the ready rooms. It's built in the galley, one special meal at a time. But keeping these traditions alive isn't easy. The ocean has a way of making everything harder. And when it comes to feeding thousands in the middle of nowhere, the challenges are constant. Feeding a floating city might sound impressive, but it's never easy. The ocean doesn't care about schedules, menus, or supply chains. Out here, every meal is a battle against forces that never stop pressing in. Start with the weather. During underway replenishment, when supply ships transfer pallets across high-tension cables, calm seas can turn chaotic in seconds. One rogue wave, and a crate of fresh food swings like a wrecking ball. Lines snap, deliveries vanish. And when that happens, the crew has to stretch supplies. Fresh fruit disappears first, frozen meat gets rationed, and menus tighten fast. Then there's storage. Yes, carriers are massive, but space is always at a premium. Every reefer and freezer is jam-packed, every dry storage room stacked floor to ceiling. And with thousands of mouths to feed, inventory must be rotated constantly. A single freezer failure could mean tons of food spoiled with no way to replace it. Out in the middle of the Pacific, there's no grocery run to save the day. And of course, there's the human challenge. Culinary specialists work in galleys that are hot, loud, and unforgiving. Steam fogs the air, pans clang non-stop, and 12-hour shifts often stretch to 14 once cleanup is done. By the final weeks of a deployment, exhaustion sets in, but the demand never slows. Breakfast still needs to be ready, mid-rats still need to be hot. The city at sea still needs to eat, yet somehow the system holds, because it has to. Jets don't launch if sailors aren't fed, engines don't get repaired on empty stomachs, and morale doesn't survive on rations alone. No matter the storm, no matter the strain, the floating fortress eats. Because on a warship, food isn't a luxury, it's survival. But behind all the noise, all the logistics, and all the long hours, lies a simple truth. A carrier doesn't just run on fuel or steel. It runs on the grit of sailors, the heat of the galleys, and the meals that keep the heart of the ship beating. When most people picture an aircraft carrier, they think of fighter jets screaming off the deck, radar towers scanning the skies, or warships cutting through waves. But deep inside, past the noise and the steel, there's another engine driving it all: food. Every loaf of bread, every tray of lasagna, every midnight plate of eggs keeps this floating city alive. It's not glamorous, and it rarely makes the headlines. But without it, the carrier's mighty power would grind to a halt. Think about it: 5,000 sailors, thousands of miles from home, relying on one another and on the meals that bring them together. Behind every launch, every mission, and every long night on watch, there's a hidden network of people working in the heat of the galleys, making sure the heartbeat never stops. And maybe that's the real story here. Technology may give the carrier its strength, but it's the human effort, the cooks, the supply chain, the traditions, and the shared meals that give it soul. A floating fortress, yes, but also a floating family, bound together one meal at a time. So the next time you see a carrier on the news or hear about its power, remember this: the true measure of strength isn't just in the steel it's built from, but in the people and the food that keep it alive.